The All-American half pound, 2 pure beef patties, lettuce, tomato.
Singles going steady.
Welcome to Singles Going Steady, the podcast dedicated to exploring great singles with a particular eye to the punk, new wave, and DIY eras of the last century. I'm Steve McGowan.
And I'm Adrienne Lee Maddock. We are in a band, the Beef People, who released a single in 1986 on our own label, Zub Records. But we're also record collectors and passionate especially about the expression of pop music perfection that is the single recording. Exploring the mystery of what makes for a great single is what propelled us to begin this podcast.
Lee?
Yeah.
Is that the Welsh part that you were talking about?
Maybe.
I thought you were, like, secretly Welsh.
Well, yeah, you tend to keep that secret.
Anyway, before we get derailed about Wales, let's talk about today's single.
Which is a whale of a single.
It is a whale of a single. Oh, boy, the hits just keep on coming. This is a really iconoclastic single, I think. It's the band from Athens, Georgia, the band REM. It's their very first single. It was released in 1981 on Hibtone Records, a little Atlanta independent label. And it is Radio Free Europe, backed with Sitting Still.
Yes, this is pre-IRS Records, pre-Murmur, independent single that made a real splash. And by being iconoclastic, I think it sort of shattered what was going on. It was not like anything else that was out at that time. Totally agree.
The music of REM at the time, I think I would describe it as kind of a revved up sort of Velvet Underground. If you took the slower, more melodic Lou Reed type songs, you know, Femme Fatale or Pale Blue Eyes, and you revved them up.
And added a Rick.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of with that little Birdsian Roger McGuinn thing that Pete Buck does. The arpeggiated guitar is really something. And of course, the inscrutable lyrics.
Yeah. When we were talking about what songs we were going to select, I was remembering a time that we were at a grocery store. And there was, in the days before the internet, if you wanted to learn about lyrics, you had to hope they would be printed in something like a lyric magazine.
Right.
See, kids, there were these things called magazines that were at pages, and you would purchase them at a newsstand or, in this case, a grocery store. This was like popular lyrics or something, so this was right on the heels of Murmur coming out.
Right.
So we'd already had in heavy rotation Radio Free Europe since the Hibtone single.
Yes.
So it's like, oh my gosh, it's in here, look in here. And just being gobsmacked by what the lyrics were, because we had no idea. It was
the ones you made up in your head were much better.
Yeah, well, you know, they were your own.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a good point, though. Back in the 80s, when there was really no internet, you couldn't just dial up, well, how do I play this song? You know, what are the lyrics to this song?
Yeah.
You know, what's that second verse? You had to figure it out on your own. And that kind of helped us learn how to play and learn how to sing and learn how to write lyrics.
In our own inimitable style, because you had no idea if it was right, except as your ear went and you got as close as you could.
Mm-hmm. But this is a pretty amazing single. It's got that real dark kind of mystic southern. You can hear the kudzu growing on it sort of sound. And,
yeah, kudzu, I guess, is sort of a leitmotif later appearing on the cover of Murmur.
Uh-huh. So let's listen to a little bit of the A side of the single, which is Radio Free Europe. It was recorded with Mitch Easter at the Drive-In Studio. We're hoping to talk to Mitch in the future.
Drive-In's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
At the time. And this is Radio Free Europe, REM, the Hibtone single, 1981.
Okay, in my mind, that is the version of the song that runs through my head.
Yes.
And
Not the re-recorded one that they did for IRS,
which
is
just
slower.
didn't-
Yeah.
it just didn't have the sort of immediacy
Mm-hmm.
and the freshness.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear them just jumping around in the studio. I think the band too was unhappy with the re-recording of it. I think first they were unhappy with the sound of the single, and then they were unhappy with the re-recording, and they realized that the single was better.
Yeah, and so what makes that single great, do you think?
Well, you've got kind of a mysterious pop edge to it. The singing, Stipe singing is amazing. You can't really figure out what he's talking about. The cool chiming Rick guitar and the Rick bass, and Bill Berry's drumming is really on it.
Yeah, and there just was nothing like that at the time, and of course
No.
it sort of gave start to 1,000 flowers bloomed.
Absolutely, a lot of
and-
wannabes,
Exactly.
including a lot of the stuff Sven and I were trying to write. Definitely had an REM
Yeah,
edge
I know.
to it. Once you learned how to pick the guitar a little bit like
Peter.
Pete Buck, you were in the club, and we wrote a lot of fake REM songs. Luckily, most of them didn't make it through.
Well, you were talking about the energy, and I think maybe folks, those early days of REM where they were quite energetic, and we were just in the last, talking about replacements and sort of coming out of hardcore. This is sort of like a Paisley hardcore,
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah, but it's fast and it's energetic and it just jumps.
Yeah, and it's funny talking about the Replacements because they were always so jealous of REM, and their manager Peter Jesperson actually went and worked with REM for a while, and they never forgave him for that. And they always looked at their career in the through the lens of what REM was doing, and REM was always behaving and playing the game, and the Replacements were getting drunk all the time. But energy. This is what the band was about back then. I used to go see them quite a bit. There was a period there when I was underage and going to shows because I had my fake ID, and pretty much any show I go to in Athens or in Atlanta, REM would be opening, and they were real road warriors. They played a lot, and they were a different band then. They were really just a blur of energy. Stipe would be a whirling dervish, and Pete Buck would jump around, and Mike Mills would jump around, and they really brought it. And it was energy was the thing. It was,
and they played up in North Carolina quite frequently,
Yes.
and there was always on the telephone poles a sign for REM coming.
right. Yes. So this is one of those singles that has an exceptional B-side too, which is almost as good as the A-side. It's a song called "Sitting Still" that was also, I think they remixed this version of it, or it was redone on the first record.
On that first album.
Yeah, right. And let's listen to a little bit of REM doing "Sitting Still," the B-side of the single.
Name of God we all agree. Secret stop it worrying. We could find an innocence. We could gather
the things that makes this a great single, we were talking about how good Sitting Still is, but that was unusual that you had this single with two incredibly sort of unique for the time songs that were both so strong.
Yeah, it could have been a double A side.
Yeah, and it really made a splash, turned people's heads.
Yeah, Sitting Still definitely is kind of a stomper at the end. It starts off a little bit quiet and then really kind of kicks in. Again, just high energy, without distorted guitars. They didn't have to go to the big loud sound. They just crank it out, using Fender amps.
And the cover, so many
are
musicians sort of are art school dropouts or art school passers through.
Yes.
And the cover certainly shows that heritage. It's a Michael Stipe photograph. It suits the style of the music. It suits the sound. It adds to the mystique. It certainly, they support each other.
Speaking of Michael Stipe, I have to mention the time that we saw him in Greenville. REM actually played the local club, the Ups Club, and it was right before they were hitting it big. It was the week that Wolves Lower was the flexi disc on Trouser Press magazine. So if you remember that was always a big deal, who was on the flexi disc.
We'll have to talk about a flexi disc
Yes.
as one of the singles that we'll go steady with.
And so they were playing at the Ups Club, and there was this big school bus came in with all these people from Athens, and but
because it's about an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
So
we got there
It was
early,
awesome, too.
and in the side room at the Ups Club is kind of like a big cafeteria, and Michael was sitting there all by himself, and he had like 15 sweaters on, and he was reading a copy of Naked Lunch.
as you do.
Yes. And so my friends Joey and Stuart were making fun of him the whole time, of course, and they went backstage while I was with them, and we drank all their beer backstage. So it was a good night. And Pete Buck kicked the monitor over, and he said that they couldn't put up with these conditions. And unfortunately, he didn't realize that the sound guy, Sammy Galloway, always traveled with a pistol in his back pocket. This is Greenville, South Carolina. But luckily, Pete seemed to make it out alive. I don't know. Maybe they wrote a check or something. I don't know. But they were still good. They were a great band. We had a great time, and their beer was great. So, REM. Radio Free Europe, Sitting Still, back when they were still indie. They hadn't gone up to the big leagues yet, but you could tell they were going.
Yeah, and they changed the game, to use a bad sports
Yes.
analogy.
Mm-hmm.
But they really did bring something to every person that had a guitar.
Yes.
It tried to emulate
Something about them.
something about REM.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing.
No.
So, do we have any recommendations?
Do you?
I would like to talk about a book that I just finished by a local writer, by Florence Dore.
I think so.
I think that's how you say her name, Dore. She's a professor at Chapel Hill at UNC, an English professor, and she's written a really interesting book about the juxtaposition of early rock and roll and Southern literature. It's called Novel Sounds, Southern Fiction, and the Age of Rock and Roll. And it is kind of a academic book, but it's very interesting. I would recommend it to anybody who's interested in things like Faulkner or Flannery O'Connor,
And you ought to be.
or Lead Belly, or
And you ought to be.
Yes, so it's well done, and I'm hoping we have spoken with her. I'm hoping that we'll have her on the show.
Maybe we'll see her on the podcast.
So
Fingers crossed.
that's one of my recommendations. Do you have any?
And I guess I sort of have a related one, which is we saw her at a reading for the book on the roof of the Durham Hotel here in Durham, North Carolina.
Oh, I
So if
didn't.
you're
I didn't
ever there-
mention who she was married to either.
Oh, well, let's not. A woman does not need to have her credibility
Wow.
affirmed by her
I didn't mean it.
associations.
I didn't mean it that way.
Especially a scholar, right?
Okay. Yes.
So
Okay.
we'll mention that later. But the rooftop at Durham Hotel is just spectacular view
Yes.
and great food. And we won't mention the chef and her association to music, but maybe later.
But I did have maybe the best hot dog I've ever eaten up there. It was wonderful, and just a great place to see the city. Recommend it highly.
So you got a place and a person and some things, all kind of in 2 recommendations.
And we didn't talk about who we.
And you got some proselytizing
Yes.
too for me.
a little spleen venting,
Exactly.
and we didn't talk about who we thought might cover this song.
Oh man.
That's
Well, I think Bette Midler would do just an astounding job.
now. I think I read somewhere that I'm just going to ignore that completely.
And Legion, I want to recommend Legion.
I think I remember reading that Scott Miller of Game Theory actually did a cover of Radio Free Europe.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Somehow Pete Buck gave him the lyrics or something, so he would sing it with the
Here,
proper
it's in
lyrics.
this magazine.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
in Volume 6.
And they're one of our favorite bands, and I would have loved to hear that. I mean, I never heard that cover, but yeah, Scott Miller and Game Theory are somebody we'll probably talk about in the future. So that's it for today. Singles Going Steady, number 009. REM, Radio Free Europe, and Sitting Still, Hibtone Records, 1981. We appreciate you listening. My name's Steve.
And I'm Adrienne.
Goodbye.
Bye.
To learn more about the artists and recordings we just talked about, visit our website at zubrecords.com and click on the Singles Going Steady icon.
You'll also find links to the persons, places, and things we recommend, and much more.
You can find episodes of Singles Going Steady on our website or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Singles Going Steady is brought to you by the power and majesty of Zub Records. Zub Records. Smart sounds for sharp people.